You sometimes hear stories about world leaders, right? And you think, what exactly is going on behind those closed doors? What happens when all that power and pressure starts to make things, well, interesting?
Definitely. It's a fascinating area.
Welcome, everyone, to Go Fact Yourself, the Top 10 List podcast. Today, our Top 10 journey is diving headfirst into history. We're looking at some truly unbelievable moments based on historical accounts and expert analysis where leaders, well, they seem to take a bit of a detour from rationality.
That's right. And you've provided some amazing top research for us. Historical chronicles, biographies, some pretty wild anecdotes, actually.
So get ready for surprising facts, some context, maybe a touch of dark humor. We're exploring those real WTF moments in leadership history.
Yeah, this top 10 journey is all about digging into that research, figuring out what happens when power and, let's say, a solid grip on reality don't quite mix.
Okay, so this top research you mentioned, it's got some seriously strange stories. Where are we kicking off this top 10 journey into leadership meltdowns?
Right. Let's start at number 10. This one's a classic of historical weirdness from the papacy, the Cadaver Synod.
The Cadaver Synod. Okay, the name alone, it sounds pretty grim. Paint the picture for us. What was going on?
Well, you have to imagine Rome, 897 AD. It's chaotic, political factions fighting for control, and Pope Stephen VI is right in the middle of it.
Okay.
Now, his predecessor, Pope Formosus, had died, but Stephen had some very strong opinions about him, even after Formosus was buried.
Strong opinions about a dead guy. How strong?
Strong enough to have Formosus's body dug up 9 months after he died.
No way. Dug up? Why?
To put him on trial, they literally dressed the decomposing corpse in full people robes, propped it up on a throne, and held a formal trial.
They put a corpse on trial. What could he possibly be charged with? And who defends a corpse?
The charges were basically crimes against the papacy, mostly political stuff, like Formosus supporting a rival claimant to the imperial throne.
Yeah.
And for the defense, they appointed a poor deacon to stand next to the body and answer for him.
Oh, man. That deacon must have had the worst day ever. So what was the verdict? Against a corpse?
Unsurprisingly guilty. Stephen then ordered the papal vestment stripped off the body. The fingers Formosus used for blessings were chopped off. And then they shucked the body into the Tiber River.
Just unbelievable. What was Stephen thinking? Was it pure politics or was he genuinely unhinged?
Looking at the top research, it seems mostly political, but definitely extreme. Formosus backed a guy Stephen opposed. So Stephen probably saw this trial, this desecration, as a way to completely invalidate Formosus and secure his own power. A really brutal theatrical move.
How did people in Rome take it? Did it work? Did it make Stephen look powerful?
Oh, no. It backfired big time. People were outraged, saw it as a sacrilegious horror show, Proof that Stephen was maybe not all there. Public anger just grew and grew. Within months, Stephen himself was thrown in prison and eventually strangled.
A fittingly grim end, I guess. So the takeaway here is about power struggles getting incredibly ugly.
Exactly. It shows how intense things could get, even in the church, and how extreme acts driven by paranoia or power grabs can just blow up in your face. It's still one of the church's biggest PR disasters, really.
And didn't Formosus' body have more adventures after being thrown in the river?
Oh, yeah. Her top research probably mentioned it. Fishermen apparently pulled the body out later. He got reburied. Then another pope dug him up again before he was finally reinterred for good. Even dead, he couldn't catch a break from Roman politics.
Wild. Okay, from the truly macabre to the, well, still pretty weird. Number 9 on our top 10 journey. Muammar Gaddafi and his famous all-female, supposedly virgin bodyguard squad. What's the story there?
Right, the Amazonian Guard. What's fascinating here is the massive gap between the public image Gaddafi projected and the grim reality that came out later, especially after his fall.
So the image was, what, empowered women protecting their leader?
Exactly. He spun it as female empowerment. These elite fighters, handpicked, trained. But the stories that emerged paint a much darker picture.
Darker how? What did the top research suggest?
Well, alongside the elite training and the supposed chastity oaths, there were widespread allegations of coercion, sexual abuse, total control. Basically, exploitation masked as empowerment.
So a classic authoritarian tactic.
Yeah.
Progressive facade, ugly reality.
Precisely. Gaddafi loved theatrics. His whole dictatorship was like performance art. And this guard fit right in, lipstick, high heels, automatic weapons. It was a deliberate, striking image, a weird mix of symbols.
And his whole setup was pretty theatrical too, right? Bedouin tents and golden guns.
Oh, yeah. The research mentions the Bedouin tents in his compound, the gold-plated AKs, camels wandering around. It was all part of this persona, this image of being outside the norm. Utterly surreal.
Did we learn more when Tripoli fell? From the guards themselves?
Yes. As the regime collapsed, some guards defected or were captured, and their testimonies, they were harrowing. Stories of exploitation, of being trapped, of the promises being lies. It completely shattered that empowerment myth.
Wasn't there a particularly disturbing story about one guard?
Yeah, there was an account, really chilling, of one bodyguard reportedly throwing herself in front of Gaddafi during an attack, sacrificing her life for him.
Wow.
And you're left wondering, was that loyalty or the result of years of intense manipulation and control? It's deeply unsettling.
Definitely unsettling. Okay, moving on. Number 8 in our top 10 journey takes us way back. Emperor Caligula. Did he really try to make his horse a senator?
Caligula and Incitatus. Well, whether he literally meant to appoint his horse is debated by historians. Some think it might have been political satire.
Satire? How so?
Like a way to insult the Roman Senate, basically saying, my horse is more worthy of office than you useless politicians. Given Caligula's known contempt for the Senate, it's plausible.
But he did treat the horse pretty well. Marble stalls, golden troughs. That part's real.
Oh, yes. Accounts from guys like Suetonius detail the lavish treatment. Purple blankets, jewel-studded collars, his own house, servants. And Suetonius does say Caligula considered making Incitatus a consul the highest office.
So maybe not satire. Maybe just madness.
That's the other side of the debate. Considering Caligula's other behavior, it leans more towards genuine derangement, or at least extreme egomania and tyranny. He started out popular, but then something seemed to snap. Maybe an illness.
What else did he do that was off the rails? The top research must have some examples.
No, plenty. Demanding to be worshipped as a living god, building temples to himself, threatening to execute the moon, starting fights with the sea god Neptune, ordering soldiers to collect seashells as war booty after a canceled invasion, randomly having audience members thrown to wild beasts in the arena just because he was bored.
Talking to the moon. Seriously.
Suetonius writes about it. Apparently, he'd have conversations, yell threats at it, and he treated senators terribly, making them run alongside his chariot like dogs. It paints a picture of someone utterly disconnected.
Yeah, sounds like it. No wonder his reign didn't last long.
Nope. Just under 4 years. His cruelty and unpredictability caught up with him. His own Praetorian Guard conspired with senators and assassinated him.
Okay, let's shift to something more recent, maybe less. Divinely mad. Number 7 on the top 10 journey. President Lyndon B. Johnson holding meetings while on the toilet. This isn't insanity, right? But what does it tell us?
Right, LBJ. This isn't about psychosis, definitely not. But it speaks volumes about his personality, his leadership style, his whole approach to power. The top research paints a picture of a man who just bulldozed boundaries. Personal, professional, didn't matter.
So he'd actually be sitting there talking policy with the door open.
Apparently, yes. Briefings, giving orders, even signing bills sometimes.
Right.
Door open, staffers just had to deal with it. It was a known thing.
It's quite a power move.
Exactly. It fits perfectly with the famous Johnson treatment, where he'd get right in your face, leaning over you, touching you, using his sheer physical presence and booming voice to intimidate and persuade. Total invasion of personal space, holding meetings from the toilet. It's like the ultimate expression of that. Owning the room, owning the situation, making you uncomfortable, putting you off balance. Pure dominance.
And it wasn't just the bathroom stuff, right? The research mentioned other crooks.
Oh, yeah. He was famously uninhibited. Showing off his gallbladder surgery scar to reporters, pulling it right out.
He did?
Yep. Had crude nicknames for his own anatomy, wasn't shy about mentioning them. There are even stories about him flashing reporters. It was all part of this larger-than-life, unfiltered, some might say vulgar persona.
I remember reading a quote about him telling his tailor to make room for his mall.
Yes, that quote about making more room for his nuts is pretty infamous. Crude, but it perfectly captures his whole style. Raw, aggressive, unapologetic.
And the amphibious car. That sounds more like a prank.
Another classic LBJ story. He had this car that could go on land and water. He apparently loved scaring guests by pretending to lose control and driving straight towards a lake at his ranch, only to splash right in at the last second.
He sounds exhausting.
A force of nature, definitely not mad, but absolutely a leader who played by his own very unique set of rules. Okay, number 6 on our top 10 journey is, well, it's back to genuine mental health struggles. King Charles VI of France. He thought he was made of glass.
Made of glass. Wow, that sounds Terrifyingly fragile.
It really does. Charles VI, reigning in the late 14th, early 15th century, he suffered from these severe psychotic episodes, and this glass delusion was one of those persistent and bizarre symptoms.
So he actually truly believed if someone touched him, he'd shatter.
That seems to be the case. He reportedly lived in constant fear, wouldn't let people touch him. He even had iron rods sewn into his clothes for, like, reinforcement. Imagine being a king surrounded by courtiers but terrified of contact.
So isolating. Did he have other symptoms?
Yeah.
The top research must cover more.
Oh, yes, sadly. There were periods where he'd just sit motionless, completely unresponsive, catatonic, basically. Then other times, extreme agitation, screaming fits. There was even a horrifying incident where, during a psychotic break, he attacked and killed several of his own knights, thinking they were enemies.
Good grief.
And memory loss, too. Sometimes he wouldn't recognize his family or even remember he was the king.
That's a huge contrast because wasn't he initially called Charles the Beloved?
Exactly. He started out quite promisingly. His descent into what became known as Charles the Mad was a real tragedy, not just for him, but for France.
Do we know what caused it? And this glass delusion thing was that common?
Well, the causes are debated. Could be genetic factors. Royal families weren't exactly avoiding inbreeding back then, extreme stress, maybe even poisoning, like mercury exposure from treatments. As for the glass delusion, interestingly, it wasn't unique to him. It was a known, though rare phenomenon in medieval and early modern Europe, maybe tied to anxieties about the fragility of life or status.
And the impact on France, with the king being incapacitated so often.
Chaos, pretty much. It created a huge power vacuum. His uncles and brother fought for control, leading to civil war, instability. It weakened France significantly, especially during the 100 Years' War with England. It really paved the way for figures like Joan of Arc later on, rising out of that chaos.
And I assume the treatments back then weren't exactly effective.
No, not at all. They tried prayers, pilgrimages, bloodletting, weird herbal concoctions. Nothing worked. It really highlights how helpless they were against severe mental illness.
That's a sad story. Okay, from fragility to, well, maybe misplaced priorities. Number 5 on the top 10 journey, Tsar Peter III of Russia, obsessed with toy soldiers.
Yes, Peter III. His reign was incredibly short, only about 6 months, but he managed to make some truly bizarre choices in that time. His obsession with Prussia was probably the biggest one.
A Russian czar loving Prussia. Weren't they just fighting them?
Exactly. Russia was literally fighting Prussia in the 7 Years' War when Peter came to the throne. But Peter, who was actually German by birth and upbringing, idolized Frederick the Great. First thing he does, pulls Russia out of the war, gives back territory they'd won, and basically switches sides.
That must have gone down well back home.
Like a lead balloon. He forced the Russian army, who were proud of their own traditions, into Prussian-style uniforms. He constantly praised Prussian ways and criticized everything Russian. He alienated pretty much everyone, the army, the church, the nobility.
And where do the toy soldiers fit in?
Well, amid all this diplomatic and military upheaval, the top research indicates he spent an enormous amount of time playing with his toy soldiers, drilling them, staging mock battles in the palace, apparently neglecting actual state affairs to do it.
He prioritized toy soldiers over running the empire.
It seems that way sometimes. There are stories of him court-martialing a rat for eating one of his soldiers, and punishing real soldiers for not marching perfectly, like his toys. He seemed more interested in the aesthetics of Prussian military life than the realities of governing Russia.
And didn't he start a pointless war, too?
Yes. He declared war on Denmark, who had been Russia's ally, over some obscure claim related to his German homeland, Holstein. Most historians think he just wanted an excuse to show off his army in their new Prussian uniforms, even though they weren't properly trained in Prussian tactics yet. It was all about his personal fixation.
So, obsessed with Prussia, playing with toys, starting pointless wars. How did it end for him?
Quickly, his wife, Catherine, soon to be Catherine the Great, was much smarter and more politically savvy. Seeing how unpopular Peter was making himself, she organized a coup with the help of the Imperial Guard. Peter was overthrown just 6 months into his reign.
And what happened to him?
He died shortly after being deposed. Officially, it was something like apoplexy or hemorrhoids, but most historians suspect he was assassinated, probably strangled, by Catherine's supporters.
It's not surprising, really. Okay, number 4 on our top 10 journey. This is maybe the most famous image of leadership detachment. Emperor Nero fiddling while Rome burned. How much truth is there to that?
Right. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD, the image of Nero playing his lyre, not actually a fiddle while the city burns, is iconic, but it's probably not literally true.
Oh, so he wasn't playing music.
Well, the historian Tacitus, who's usually quite critical of Nero, says Nero was actually away at his villa in Antium when the fire started. He rushed back to Rome and organized relief efforts, even opening his palaces to house the homeless. The story of him singing about the fall of Troy from a tower while watching the fire likely emerged later, fueled by his unpopularity.
So why did the story stick? Why blame him?
Because people needed a scapegoat. And Nero's later actions didn't help. He used the land cleared by the fire to build his extravagant Golden House palace, which looked pretty self-serving. And then, crucially, he blamed the fire on the Christians, a small and unpopular sect at the time, initiating the first major Roman persecution against them. That cemented his brutal reputation.
Okay, so maybe not fiddling, but still pretty awful.
Right.
And he had other issues, right? Like with his mother.
Oh, absolutely. His relationship with his mother, Agrippina the Younger, is a whole saga. She was hugely influential in getting him the throne, basically ruled through him at first. But Nero grew to resent her power.
So he got rid of her.
He tried and failed, then tried again. Okay. Famously, he arranged for her to be on a specially designed boat that would collapse and sink.
A collapsible boat? Seriously?
Yep. But Agrippina was a strong swimmer and survived. She even supposedly sent a message back to Nero saying she was fine, knowing full well he tried to kill her.
Wow. So what did Nero do then?
He panicked and just sent soldiers to finish the job, stabbed her to death. Matricide. Pretty shocking, even for Rome.
Yikes. What other bizarre stuff was he known for? The top research must be full of it.
Loads. He fancied himself a great artist, poet, singer, lyre player, chariot racer. He'd force senators and nobles to attend his performances, which were apparently terrible and went on for hours. Guards would lock the door so no one could leave. People supposedly faked their own deaths to escape.
Fake their own deaths.
So the stories go. He also had scandalous personal habits, lavish orgies, wandering the streets in disguise, picking fights. He famously married a castrated male slave named Sporus, making him dress as the empress.
Okay, this guy sounds genuinely disturbed. How did it all end?
Predictably badly. His extravagance drained the treasury, his cruelty alienated everyone. Eventually, governors in the provinces rebelled. The Senate declared him a public enemy. He fled Rome and, facing capture, committed suicide with the help of a servant.
And his famous last words?
Qualis artifex perio. What an artist dies in me. Sums him up perfectly, doesn't it? Utterly self-absorbed to the very end.
It really does. Okay, from ancient Rome to 20th century Uganda. Number 3 on the top 10 journey. Idi Amin, the butcher of Uganda, sending love letters to the queen.
Yeah, Idi Amin Dada Umi, a brutal dictator responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths, yet capable of these incredibly bizarre, almost childlike gestures. His relationship with Queen Elizabeth II is a prime example.
So what's the story with the letters? He hated Britain, right? Called himself the conqueror of the British Empire.
He did. He gave himself this ridiculously long title, maybe 40 words, including conqueror of the British Empire in Africa in general and Uganda in particular. He kicked British diplomats out and nationalized British assets, but then, yeah, he'd send these weirdly affectionate messages to the Queen.
Like what kind of messages?
The most famous one was probably a Valentine's Day telegram he sent her one year, expressing his deep affection. Apparently, he even included a poem for her corgis.
A poem for the corgis from Idi Amin.
I know, right? It's this baffling mix of brutal dictator and a lovesick fanboy. He seemed to have this genuine, if completely misplaced, admiration for her personally, even while trashing her country.
Where did that come from? He was a soldier in the British colonial army, wasn't he?
He was. King's African Rifles rose through the ranks. Maybe some of that colonial-era deference lingered in a really warped way. He seized power in a coup, initially charming, but quickly showing his violent, erratic side. Mood swings, paranoia.
And he made other weird claims too, right? Like about Scotland.
Oh, yeah. He declared himself the rightful king of Scotland at one point.
Right.
Said the Scots were fighting for freedom from English oppression, and he was their man. Just another example of his grandiosity.
It's hard to reconcile the corgi poems with the mass murder.
It really is. It speaks to the sheer unpredictability and, frankly, the strangeness of his personality, this bizarre mix of charm, violence, and absurdity.
What happened to him in the end?
He was overthrown in 1979 after a disastrous war with Tanzania. He fled into exile, eventually settling in Saudi Arabia, where he lived relatively quietly until his death in 2003.
A strange footnote to a terrifying reign. Okay, number 2 on our top 10 journey. Back to ancient history. Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China. He wanted to live forever, right?
Yes, Qin Shi Huang, the man who unified China, built parts of the Great Wall, and commissioned that incredible terracotta army, was utterly terrified of death. His quest for immortality became an obsession.
And how did he go about trying to achieve immortality?
Well, this is where it gets ironic. He turned to alchemists and court physicians who promised him elixirs of life. The problem was, many of these elixirs contained mercury.
Mercury. They thought mercury would make him live forever.
Apparently so. They thought its liquid, silvery properties were magical, life-giving. So the emperor started consuming these mercury pills or potions regularly.
It can't have ended well.
Not at all. We know now mercury is highly toxic. It likely drove him increasingly insane paranoia, hallucinations, physical decline. So the very thing he took to live forever probably killed him, or at least hastened his death and made his final years miserable.
The ultimate irony. And his tomb reflects this obsession too, right, with the terracotta army.
Absolutely. That army, thousands of unique, life-size soldiers, was meant to protect him in the afterlife. And his actual burial mound, which remains largely unexcavated, is supposedly legendary. Ancient texts claim it contains palaces, treasures, booby traps, and even rivers of flowing mercury to represent China's rivers.
Rivers of mercury. Seriously, that's the legend. And scientific surveys have detected unusually high levels of mercury in the soil around the mound, so maybe there's truth to it. It's supposed to be incredibly dangerous to enter.
What else did he do in his quest? The top research must have more. Oh, yeah. He sent huge expeditions out to sea, searching for mythical islands where immortals supposedly lived, hoping to find the elixir there. He became paranoid about assassins, even sea gods plotting against him. There's a story he once got angry during a storm on a sacred mountain and ordered thousands of convicts to cut down all its trees and paint the mountain red as punishment.
Punishing a mountain.
And firing arrows into fog banks, trying to kill the sea god he thought was causing trouble. His fear of death just consumed him after he'd achieved his life's goal of unifying China.
And wasn't there a grim legend about the people who built his tomb?
Yes. The story goes that after the tomb was completed, all the artisans and laborers who knew its secrets were sealed inside, along with the emperor's childless concubines, to ensure no one could ever reveal its location or treasures.
Wow.
A brutal final act.
Chilling. Okay, we've reached the top. Number 1 on our top 10 journey into leadership WTF moments. President Andrew Jackson, beating his own would-be assassin.
This one is pure, unadulterated Andrew Jackson, January 1835. It's the first recorded assassination attempt on a sitting U.S. president, and Jackson's reaction was, well, explosive.
What happened exactly?
Jackson was leaving the Capitol building after a funeral. A man named Richard Lawrence stepped out from behind a pillar, raised a pistol, and fired at point-blank range.
Oh, my God.
But the pistol misfired, the percussion cap failed. Lawrence immediately pulled out a second pistol and fired again. It also misfired. Just incredible odds. Now, Jackson was 67 years old at the time, frail, often ill, but his reaction wasn't fear or shock. It was pure rage.
So what did he do?
He lunged at Lawrence and started beating him savagely with his heavy hickory walking cane.
The president beat up his own attacker with a cane.
Viciously. Eyewitnesses, supposedly including Davy Crockett, who was nearby, said Jackson had to be physically pulled off Lawrence by several people because he wouldn't stop hitting him. Jackson was convinced Lawrence was part of a political conspiracy sent by his enemies.
Wow, that is something else. Perfectly Jackson, though, right?
Absolutely. This is the guy famous for dueling. He killed a man in a duel over an insult to his wife. He carried a bullet lodged near his heart from another duel for decades. He survived numerous illnesses and injuries. He was famously tough, incredibly stubborn, and had a volcanic temper. Beating down his attacker was almost in character.
And didn't he have that giant block of cheese in the White House?
Yes, the mammoth cheese. A group of dairy farmers sent him a massive 1,400-pound wheel of cheddar. He put it in the main foyer of the White House and invited the public to come eat it during a reception. Thousands showed up. Apparently, the cheese was gone in 2 hours, and the White House stank of cheese for days. Classic Jackson populace, larger than life.
So surviving a double misfire and then beating the guy with a cane?
Yeah.
It just fits.
It really does. It encapsulates his legendary toughness, his fiery temper, and his absolute refusal to back down, even when facing death. A truly unforgettable moment.
Okay, before we wrap up, let's hit the fact blast zone. Just some quick-fire weirdness from the top research. What else stood out?
All right, quick facts. How about Kim Jong-il claiming he shot 11 holes in one the first time he ever played golf?
Right. Believable. What else?
Sultan Ibrahim the Mad of the Ottoman Empire, supposedly drowning his entire harem, nearly 300 women, in the Bosphorus because he was paranoid one was plotting against him.
Grim. Keep 'em coming.
North Korea kidnapping a famous South Korean film director and his actress wife, forcing them to remake Godzilla and other movies for Kim Jong-il.
That actually happened. Wow.
Pope Benedict IX, the only pope to serve 3 separate terms, apparently sold the papacy. Twice.
Sold the papacy. Like, on eBay.
Not quite eBay, but yeah. And finally, King Charles II of Spain, whose Habsburg jaw was so pronounced due to generations of inbreeding that he could barely chew or speak properly.
Okay, that's quite a collection of bizarre footnotes. So that brings our top 10 journey to a close. What a ride through leadership eccentricity.
It really is something, isn't it? Looking at these moments, drawn from all that top research, you see this incredible range from deadly paranoia to just really weird habits. It really drives home the human factor in history.
Absolutely. These aren't just abstract historical figures. There were people dealing with immense power, pressure, sometimes mental illness, sometimes just colossal egos. It makes you think about what really goes into decision-making at that level.
Yeah, and that fine line. When does strong leadership become tyranny? When does quirky become dangerously detached? It prompts you to think about the pressures and the personalities involved.
It definitely does. These stories offer such a strange, sometimes funny, sometimes terrifying perspective on power throughout history. It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? What invisible pressures or hidden flaws might be shaping the decisions of leaders, even today?
That's the provocative thought, isn't it? How much do we really know about what drives those in power, and how thin is the veil between rational leadership and, well, something else entirely, something to definitely mull over.